I'm here in the sky in order to bring you some thoughts on Project Wingman, the world's most shameless Ace Combat ripoff. And while it is a ripoff, I don't want people to interpret this comment from me as a criticism of it being a ripoff. Thought I'd add this just to clarify, because like back when I was playing Xenonauts, I was like, wow, this game just steals everything from other games. They've just repackaged somebody else's work by redoing it, essentially. And I thought, well, it's good that in the medium of video games, as far as I know, it's not possible to copyright like design ideas and things like that, and motifs or anything really. So somebody else can remake your game and re-release it under a different name. That is legal. It just tends not to happen because it's very difficult to do. But if you want some free money, you can do this without any franchise rights or anything like that, which you would need in other mediums. So if you like Ace Combat, the good news is there's another Ace Combat game. That's good, right? Now there's more of the content you like. I guess it's bad news for whoever owns the Ace Combat franchise because they missed out on making the money this game made. But it was their fault for not making it themselves. They had that option. They could have hired another development studio to make another Ace Combat game if they wanted. So anyway, while this game is absolutely shameless in how it's a ripoff, it has like no ideas of its own, I still think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Right, that rant aside, what I was going to say was, look at how terrible this footage is. The reason this footage is so shaky and difficult to watch is I'm playing, of course, in VR mode. And the main point I came on here today to talk about in this video is, well, very briefly, a boast. Look at how not motion sick I am. That's the main point in this video, I guess. Even this horrid shaky footage is probably making you motion sick right now if you're more susceptible to it than me, I don't know. But my heroic claim, the huge boast I want to tell the internet about, is that my brain is so disconnected from reality that it's perfectly happy to ignore what's happening right in front of my eyes. My brain doesn't register that anything strange is happening. It's perfectly fine to accept that I'm whirling around, rising, lowering, spinning, regularly being on the verge of participating in a plane crash due to haphazard piloting. So, thanks brain, that's my claim to fame now. I can play this game without getting motion sick. I think it's something like 20% of people, I seem to vaguely remember some study on it. 20% of people don't really get motion sick and can do stupid things like this. So I'm one of the chosen ones, how about that? That's the main point. But this point does invite some other thoughts, of course, doesn't it? Because if I'm the chosen one, and my chosen one ability is that I can play Project Wingman in VR, is that actually good? What does this power get me? I wanted to answer that question by looking at this game in particular and also just talking about my experience of VR games more generally. So we'll start with this game in particular since we're looking at it right now. The specifics of whether you'll like this game I guess will just come down to, do you like Ace Combat? Because it's quite literally exactly the same. It's a game series where it takes World War II dogfighting essentially and says, what if modern fighter jets also worked like that? It's a world where planes are like really common, they're really cheap and versatile. It costs something like $20,000 in the game's plane store to get a high-end fighter jet, that sort of thing. Fuel just isn't a problem, there's a runway every 50 meters, and your planes will carry over 100 missiles because missiles are cool and that's just about it, combined with vaguely military-sounding chatter on this open mic where you even hear what the enemy is saying to each other. It creates this epic-feeling fantasy plane fighting system of sorts. That's kind of interesting. What if planes were cheap? What if missiles sucked but were really small and you could carry hundreds of them? And, I don't know, what if everyone was very friendly and they just talked to each other while fighting and said epic things and epic music was always playing and stuff like that? I bet anyone who actually likes planes in any way or likes military aviation probably has a mental breakdown every 3 frames looking at a game like this. It's just like the most horrible portrayal of what aerial combat would be like and is like in real life. But it's pretty cool, and that's all there is to say about it really. And it's also pretty cool to do it in VR. That's the specific point to make. The big question is, while it's cool I guess, is it better than just playing it normally? And that's where I don't quite know. Like, you might think VR being a very expensive to get into thing has to be a lot better than playing it the normal way, right? And the general point that always comes up is that it's a unique experience, but that experience isn't necessarily better than the intended experience. Or to put this another way, while it's a unique and compelling experience that you can't get anywhere else, that is true, I have this game installed and I basically never play it. I don't want to go back, even though I really like it. So this is the confusing message I want to unpack in this video. As you might know, playing a game in VR does come with a load of downsides. First, the boring one I guess, which I won't really focus on, the general barrier to entry. I'm playing this game on a setup that costs something like $2,000 gradually put together over the years. It's good enough to play this game on the highest settings normally, and just about the lowest settings in VR. I need to spend another $2,000 to get like tolerable smooth experiences with good graphics, where you need to run the entire thing at 4K, or like higher than that ideally, and 90 frames per second or higher than that ideally. And even good PCs just can't really do that. That's going to be a limitation with anything in VR basically. I just tolerate the terrible frame rate and ignore it, which is harder to do in VR than it is just watching the video back. Much like I'm ignoring the motion sickness as well, I guess. It just prevents me from having to buy an Nvidia like 4090 or something. I'm using a 3060 here if you're interested, but let's just assume we have all the equipment. What are the limitations that we have to hack through? It's been said before and it will be said again, wearing a VR headset is rubbish. It does make any gaming experience less tolerable and less enjoyable. And even just playing a game like on a static screen inside the headset is really annoying too, sometimes anyway. Can also be pretty good, because your eyes don't really like having these hot and bright things almost touching them. Like the electronics of the system gets hot and it's almost touching your eyes. So like playing 1 hour of VR games with this setup is like a mind-numbing experience where your brain has to work really hard to process tons of extra input, while also having a hot thing that you're holding up with your neck muscle that adds extra weight to your head, and you have to make a decent effort just to like plug it in and put it on and connect it to the PC. I'm using a wireless connection which takes extra steps, and it randomly won't work for unknown reasons about 25% of the time, which is true with basically every aspect of VR gaming. And I just think, even though flying around in this footage is really cool, it's just not quite worth it. Like, I would have FOMO if I'd never done it, but having done it for a few hours, my main takeaway is, well, I'm glad it's not actually that good, because I know, like, when I can't be bothered to get the VR setup working, I'm not really missing out on all that much anyway, so it's fine. Maybe that's just because, though, Project Wingman here isn't the best ambassador for VR games, because it isn't a VR game. It's not got any motion controls, that's what I mean by that really. I did play the Stalker thing as well, Into the Radius, for like 20 hours with enthusiasm and didn't notice the tiredness at all that I'm ranting about here, so it can be done correctly. Well, the other problem is that quote-unquote real VR games do have even more barriers to entry than an experience like this thing I'm showing you here, because you need a decent amount of space if your game is going to have VR motion controls, preferably space right next to your PC, which I totally don't have. And motion controls are a janky form of controls at the best of times, where you frequently don't get it doing what you want because of hardware limitations, which just makes you feel less skilled, you're less in control, there's less gameplay possible with that hardware setup. And of course, the sheer inexperience, I guess, of developers making pure VR games with motion controls means that when it comes to playing games like that, you tend to have problems more often. This is my guess for the reason anyway, just inexperience, because immersion breaking, janky, weird or broken, whatever you like to call it, experiences will happen constantly while playing VR games, especially like real VR games. Playing a game like this, where it's not a real VR game, is better in that regard, in that because this is a normal game that works just fine like with a controller, just reprojecting the image to be all around you doesn't change very much. The game still works just fine, so that's a good aspect to playing a sort of fake VR game. Anyway, I guess this is all tangential to the point, isn't it? The point is just that VR gaming is genuinely really cool, and I've sort of been into it for many years, like on and off, like never really playing a game very much, but I have played like all of Skyrim and Fallout 4 in VR and a bunch of other random things as well. But the disadvantages that come with the whole thing are large enough that even with these quality experiences you can get, it doesn't necessarily justify having to deal with all of the rubbish that comes with it, in my personal opinion. Well, here's my final example. I have Half-Life Alyx, the one everyone says is good. And I've been waiting for Half-Life 3 like everyone else for a long time, so I'm pretty motivated to play it. and I've got a computer that can run it, I've got a VR headset, I've got a wireless thing all over the house, I can play it anywhere I want. However, I would have to kind of move furniture around and turn some more stuff on and press some buttons and connect some wires, and therefore I don't. Like, that's enough hassle that I'm not going to do this thing that I want to do. It's not actually that annoying to set up, but it's annoying enough that I A, haven't done the thing, and B, I'm willing to complain about it on the internet. This is all, as usual, somebody else's fault. There needs to be a way for VR games to be significantly easier to play, and I can't imagine that existing, which really dampens my enthusiasm for the whole endeavour, the whole project. And there I go, crashing my plane right into that giant thing. That's what happens when you pilot haphazardly all the time. Eventually, it doesn't pay off, but when it does pay off, you get cool things like near misses, which is fun, especially in VR. Probably doesn't look that fun from here. This is going to be the problem, isn't it, with talking about VR games just in a normal video. I can't tell you why things are fun, because the boring stuff is more fun in VR. But getting into VR makes gaming more boring, or whatever I'm ranting about here, so there's some sort of circular problem. What we're going to do now is we're going to move back to doing the impossible. I'm going to talk about what I'm actually showing on the screen. Because of my piloting failure, I am forced to repeat this mission, which brings up a gripe that I want to complain about to you today: a lack of checkpoints. Basically, if you fail a mission, you start again. Nothing too outrageous, you might think. The problem is that the missions are usually divided into several phases with different objectives, and generally speaking, the start is quite easy. So a recurring problem I had was that if I died on a mission, I didn't really want to immediately repeat the earlier section, because even easy combat takes a while to resolve, and the missions are pretty long, in the 20 to 40 minutes range. So repeating, say, 15 minutes of gameplay immediately after you just did it leaves me wishing for a checkpoint system or a live system or something old school, I don't know. Of course, I may only be complaining about this because I am in VR, where the tolerance for long gaming sessions is so low that any game design aspect that involves repeating content and not being taken to do new things feels especially disappointing. I understand the challenge is supposed to be don't die, but I found myself not caring about that because I felt I could probably do it if I wasn't actively making the game harder by flying in such a way that I felt was more fun or something. Actually, I did have a point about the difficulty, as far as I found it anyway. As you might have seen in some of this footage, I was generally flying a plane that could outturn all of the enemies, which made dogfighting 1 billion times easier. There was only one plane available that could do this, and I eventually thought I have to try the other ones. However, in the other ones, not only did they tend to have cockpits with more obstructions, another VR-only problem here I guess, but the slower rate of turn meant that enemies could often move behind me but not me behind them. This is where actually knowing something about piloting would probably come in. However, the game itself doesn't contain any such information or tutorials, and I didn't know any outside of the game, so that was the end of that basically. I found that once the enemy can outturn you, you probably won't be able to get a missile off right on their tail, that being the circumstance in which they tend not to miss, because pretty much everything can outturn a missile, meaning you need to fire at the right moment in the enemy's flight patterns. There does tend to be this moment every 30 seconds or so, when an enemy plane will just chill and fly in a straight line for a few seconds, probably to let you kill it. But because I couldn't be there for it, because I couldn't turn fast enough, I couldn't really kill enemies, and things slowed down to a crawl where it was taking ages to make any progress in missions, and I kept actually getting hit by things, which wasn't a problem in the faster plane. So there's some comment on the balancing or difficulty there or something. At least for me, with no skill, taking one plane made the fights quite easy, but that also became a problem because you have to do them so many times and repeat them sometimes that it was boring, and I didn't want to constantly outturn every plane one by one and gradually shoot them down. When I played in a different style, everything went wrong immediately and it was too hard. So I had two different kinds of experience there. I guess I'm looking for a learning curve to be able to get good at using the other kinds of planes. So those were my two problems, I guess. The lack of checkpointing and the lack of reason to take the other planes, for me at least. The fun of the game, which is very fun, is located on islands, in a sea of repetition and waiting around for something to happen or to happen again. And the money you get in missions to buy new planes had no purpose for me, which sort of dampened the experience, but I wasn't really playing for that anyway, so I guess I don't care too much about that. Well, you might have seen just now I got soft-locked and had to just quit the game because the main menu glitched out, something that happened relatively often in this game. That's not even one of the two main glitches I want to talk about. It's time to move on to my next topic, which is glitches, basically. I didn't get very far in this game, and I wonder if I'd got further, would some of my complaints about the game gone away? In particular, would there be more interesting planes to buy that could turn faster than the one I liked, and I could fly that instead, for example? But I didn't get that far with the game because the number of glitches went up over time, and eventually I couldn't take it. So let's talk about that, and I've got a cause to posit to you. Obviously, being in VR is going to be one of the causes. VR is just a glitchy way of playing any game. But there was another big thing as well which caused all kinds of issues, and ultimately, I just had to stop playing this game, even like when trying to force myself to play it because I really wanted to find those little globules of fun. It just became so technically difficult to get there that putting all of my possible complaints about the gameplay aside or the actual game design, it just wasn't happening. And that's a huge shame. I'm not really putting this forward as a complaint. I'm putting it forward as a disappointment statement. There's no word for that, is there? A complaint that's really just about the disappointing aspect of it. I thought I was going to have more fun than I did. I don't know whether the game designers could really do much about this because the world of VR is packed with so many problems that are probably linked to the many different proprietary software and firmware links between the game and you that happens with VR. For example, I'm playing this on I forgot what it's called, the Meta Quest 3, which doesn't natively support playing games on Steam, which this is, so I'm using the Steam Link app, an app which Steam has absolutely no incentive to keep working, and I would say Steam Link crashed, I don't know, 50% of the time. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say 50% of the time Steam Link crashed, and that caused me to have to stop playing the game. I might have some footage of it happening somewhere if I'm lucky. There was this effect where, for whatever reason, everything would judder around, and it wasn't being caused by the MetaQuest, because if you turned off Steam Link it would be fine. The link between the thing on my face, a router somewhere, my PC somewhere, and Steam VR running. Well, Steam VR is its own thing running separate to Meta's VR thing, which also has to run on your PC to do all of this, and they probably can't talk to each other. It messed up regularly. In fact, that was one of the big two glitches I wanted to focus down on, so let's get to that. But in fact, to make things worse, let's talk about the other one first, because it's less interesting. Glitch number one that caused me to stop playing the game was control problems. We already saw the softlock-like state earlier, in which sometimes buttons in menus would stop being interactable for reasons unknown to science, particularly inconvenient when it's stuff like exiting the mission. I also encountered a case where the controls were reversed one day for unknown reasons, meaning up was down, left was right and such. That's all very fun, but the worst offender was a case I think I have footage from, not that you can tell this is the case, where the controls decided to give themselves an overhaul and started using the face buttons to steer, like the analog sticks changed weapons or something. And I think it's happening in this footage, but I got used to it after a while and somehow adjusted to this new control scheme, although it was harder to fly. Well, after some more frustration, I did try looking up the controls in the menu and seeing if they'd changed or could I change them back. This ended up not helping, and I think the softlock controls thing happened again while I was here, and I got stuck in the menu forever, so I couldn't even go back to the game after trying to play with the settings. Well, there's all that drama happening in the background. It's a real drag, as you might imagine. And then there's the thing I mentioned about the Steam Link breaking, which for some reason affected Project Wingman very heavily. I have seen it happen now and again in other games, but it's thankfully quite rare. For some reason, Project Wingman has a problem with this. And I think I might know what's happening to some extent anyway, because I noticed that all these glitches and stuff started occurring at a much higher rate all of a sudden during my playthrough of the game. And it came alongside a big drop in performance, which I realized was because the game had been updated. It had this long after release update where they revamped the UI and added various other things because they were preparing to release a DLC. Which is all very nice, but for whatever reason, old man Devin, here with this stupid thing on his face somewhere in the VR world, for him it ended up making the game run like trash and get loads of technical problems, which essentially broke the game on the regular. I turned the graphics down to minimum and managed to get my frames back, which was still okay actually. Some of this footage somewhere in this video is on the minimum settings and it still looks alright. With the caveat, of course, that everything looks a bit worse in actual VR because the pixels are like blown up and right in front of your face, so all of the problems are more obvious and everything's more blurry and such than this. Again, just not showing you what I'm talking about. And I think I actually can't show you what I'm talking about, so I've even got an excuse this time. Well, that's all good. The point was, there was some more drama that injected itself, like some more technical problems arose, possibly because of an update, that made things even harder to play for me. And of course, we're all talking about this in the context of VR gaming, where it's already hard to play. There's already drama between you and being able to experience the game if you're going to do it in VR. So just there being these other issues that would be annoying otherwise in regular gaming as well, having them added in is a bit of a problem. It all became too much for me. So this is similar to my point about the repetition from earlier, where these are issues that might ordinarily be possible to overcome, but a player in VR is in a much worse position than usual to tolerate any imperfections in the user experience. So basically, like, VR as a concept is a big UX problem, which is most obviously solved by playing the game not in VR and just being like, well, it's not as cool, but it's more fun this way, with the fun being entirely derived from the superior UX, or to put it another and perhaps more accurate way, the lack of bad UX sucking the fun out of everything. And that's it really, like that's what I wanted to rant about, I guess. This is a cool game that gives you a good time like no other, but it's such a nightmare overall that I don't even want to have that good time, and now I get to complain about it on the internet, which is at least a silver lining, because the complaining stage of game appreciation is always fun for me, so there's always that. Well, I'm just ranting now, so we better leave it here. I played some of Project Wingman in VR, and there were several streaks of like minutes or seconds where it was really good, hidden in about 6 hours of like repetition, naked, technical breakdowns, the lenses steaming up, all the VR software being treated like a virus by the PC, having to learn new controls literally on the fly because the game decided things were going too well. And of course, if you know the MetaQuest 3, it's battery powered, so like in a game with no checkpoints, it's fairly annoying to think that you might get kicked out at any second with no ability to save. So, Project Wingman was the best and worst of my VR game sampling. It's the most inconsistent, I think that's what I'm ranting about here. I've played all sorts of VR stuff starting back in the Oculus Rift era, and my short review of all VR games is they're pretty annoying. They need to be really good games to overcome how annoying they are. And usually that's a tough order to fill, I find. I think my favourite VR game is Skyrim. Yes, I played pretty much all of Skyrim in VR. So there you have it, that's about as sophisticated as my tastes get. Once I can be bothered to move furniture around and stuff, I guess I'll try some good VR games, like Half-Life Alyx, as I mentioned earlier. Into the Radius was pretty good, there's a ray of sunshine, although it was still filled with enough VR jank and low-budget design to keep people away, I'll say, so alas, basically, goodbye. Next video will be a real one, with any luck.